No, I don't ultimately that they trust each other. And I think that what they're proposing now would be best described as a settlement scheme rather than a currency. A currency suggests, particularly a gold-backed currency suggests, that those nations would all subsume their national currencies and hence their national fiscal policy to a common policy. They don't have enough gold collectively to secure a currency that would be large enough to handle all of the currency needs of their citizens. If they are proposing, rather, a gold-backed settlement system, so that at the end of the quarter, if, as an example, the Russians had sold the Chinese $10 billion worth of doodahs, and the Chinese had sold the Russians $12 billion worth of doodahs, and there was a settlement balance of $2 billion in China's favor, that they would settle it with this BRICS currency, which would ultimately be convertible into gold. The problem with that is that in order for them to trust each other, all of them would have to contribute their gold into the settlement bank so that the person receiving the settlement could be sure to get settlement. I can imagine the Russians, as an example, having a trade deficit with the Chinese, and the Chinese saying, "We'd like our gold, please." And the Russians would say, well, here's some bricks, not gold bricks, but bricks. So no, I don't see that happening. I do see the eventual development of bilateral and multilateral settlement mechanisms outside the U.S. dollar. I see that simply because the U.S. government has been so odious in terms of applying extraterritoriality, American aspirations, goals, whims, through the SWIFT settlement system, and then later by, in effect, canceling Russia's claims to their U.S. Treasury. The United States has made it both unpleasant and dangerous for many countries, to store their foreign reserves in U.S. Treasuries because of the U.S. predilection for stealing them. And then, of course, weaponizing the SWIFT banking system, which isn't the property of the U.S. One of the things I like to say when asked questions like this is that the enemy of the U.S. dollar are not in Beijing or Moscow or Tehran. The enemy of the U.S. dollars, maybe for the first time in my life of being sort of politically correct, I see my advocacy of nuclear energy shared by people like Bill Gates, even my own president, now, rather than vilifying uranium, is seeking to buy votes by subsidizing small modular reactors. The co-founder of Greenpeace is in favor of uranium. Now, some of that is similar to the first question, the social media question. I'm not a real purveyor of fashion trends, but I can tell you this, of very important and very immediate. The Japanese post-Fukushima have gone from being almost 75% opposed to 62% in favor of nuclear power, which is allowing the current Japanese government to increase the pace of Japanese restarts, which in itself is a very, very, very important part of increasing near-term demand for uranium. I would dispute the 9% to 3% report. That measure of inflation, which is the consumer price index, is a manufactured index. I think, in fact, inflation levels have headed down because, in particular, natural gas prices and until very recently, oil prices have headed low. I think that itself is transitory. But I want to get back to the inflation measure. The consumer price index is a manufactured metric. First of all, it's, quote, hedonistic. If the makers of the index decide that the quality of appliances is higher, they adjust the price for the fact that the quality is higher. Similarly, if they think that the standards in apartments that people live on now are better than they used to be, they adjust on a hedonistic basis the utility earned by consumers without real impact on the economy. More importantly, when they report core inflation, and they do that only when it's convenient, they don't include food or fuel. And a consumer price index, which doesn't include food, is of very little use to me. But the most important criticism I have of the index as a cost of living index, which is what matters to you and I, is the fact that it doesn't include the cost of government or tax. Now, for most households in most parts of the world, at least households that are solvent enough to care about finances, tax is a more important component of the cost of living than shelter, food, energy, and transportation combined. The idea that the official measure of inflation doesn't include the cost of government is silly. Now, I guess if I didn't have to pay the tax, I wouldn't bitch so much about the index, but I don't really believe that's on offer. I've tried in a very rough form to calculate my own cost of living index, understanding that I'm sort of old and fat and I don't have to buy much. I'm not really a consumer, as you can tell. I dress poorly, I drive old cars. There's just not much I want. But anyway, I believe that the deterioration of my US dollar purchasing power is about 7% compounded. And about half that increase on an annual basis is increase in direct and indirect taxes. So when people tell me that core inflation in the United States is 2.8%, what I try to tell them is by the metric proposed by the Congressional Budget Office, that's true. But that metric is irrelevant to their own standard of living or the purchasing power of their savings or their lives. Well, perversely, and it'll take me a while to explain this, I like cash. I understand that the purchasing power of my cash means I'm actually losing money holding cash. But I believe in the current circumstance that we have, that there's a real risk of some type of black swan liquidity event. And I've learned in prior black swan liquidity events that having the cash gave me the tools and also the courage to take advantage of the circumstance rather than being taken advantage of the circumstance. Many of your listeners may be too young to remember 2008, but 2008 was a market where most markets, equity markets, debt markets, real estate markets, fell by 50%, and they fell by 50% in 6 weeks. Those people who had the cash and had the courage had a truly spectacular 2009. I happen to be one of them, and so I advocate cash. I also advocate gold and silver, and I'm delighted by the fact I'm making systematic purchases myself of gold and silver. I'm delighted to see the price gains moderated so that I can buy more cheaply. A lot of people, I guess, buy gold for greed reasons. They read stories about, the decade of the 1970s when the gold price went from $35 to $800, $850. I buy it for very different reasons. I buy it for fear reasons. For me, gold is insurance. Gold is insurance against both inflation or the depreciation of the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, but it's also insurance against declining faith in institutions and trade. The U.S. dollar is a promise to pay; it's a receipt. Gold isn't a promise to pay; it's payment. You don't have to trust the counterparty because you have been paid. You have the asset.